Today's video idea came from recent events in my life. The previous apartment I lived in was in a complex that caught fire in two different sections within a year. A business right next to my current apartment complex burned down just a month ago. And then this week, the apartment building right next to my building burned down. This really puts things into perspective for me. So I just want to advise to just be careful out there. Today's video might not be for everyone. This is a trigger warning. We are talking about over 100 women passing away due to a factory fire. If this is not for you, I hope to see you in the next video. Now, let's get into this video. On March the 25th, 1911, a tragic fire at the Asch Building in New York City claimed the life of 123 women and 23 men. Back in 1911, the Gilded Age was in the process of making way for the Progressive Era. Unions, factory conditions, and treatment of workers caused the era to be progressive. But one major definition of the Progressive Era would be the women's suffrage movement in the 1920s. Yet we are just one decade shy of that mindset, and unfortunately the factory conditions were unsanitary at best and a death trap at worst. Today's video is an example of the worst case scenario. At the turn of the 20th century, would you believe me if I told you that there were more Italians in New York City than there were in Rome? Indeed, this was the case. A large influx of immigrants were accepted into the country to help aid the labor and manpower needed to build this nation back. Factories only helped boost a state's economic state, so the state had a laissez-faire attitude or a hands-off attitude. The factories created long work days, 6 or 7 days a week. They'd get a lot of kickback from churches for making them work on Sundays, but that's for another story, and I'm looking at you, YMCA. However, there were no laws forcing the factories to be clean, or to make sure there is heat, or flowing air, or a clean and safe place to use the restroom. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle comes to mind when discussing the era. I highly recommend the book. It discusses the disgusting conditions of the meat processing situation in Chicago back then. Anyways, a huge competition in the growing capitalist society. The assembly line was invented. The factories basically had full control of their people and product. Speaking of taking advantage, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, their owners Max Blanc and Isaac Harris, made themselves wealthy by being able to mass produce the fashionable triangle shirtwaist garments. They had success for many years, but as Heidi Klum says, in fashion, one day you're in, the next you're out. And the owners were finding that the triangle shirtwaist was headed out by 1911. They put all their eggs in one basket, so instead of moving with the times, they doubled down to make more. They tried to sabotage any competition, and they made conditions worse for the ladies in the factory. The Asch Building had 10 floors. The 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the building were the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. Around 500 employees, 90% women, all in desperate need of their job. It would be freezing in the winter and unbearably humid and musty in the summer. There would be fabric dust in the air, poor ventilation, scraps of cloth everywhere, and little time to even use the restroom. These women had a barely realistic quota every day, and the days were long. Eventually, a movement for women began at the fabric factories. One by one, each factory had their women on strike. They demanded unions at their job, and one by one, they got it. But it wasn't so simple at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. You'll never believe this, but when the women at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company went on strike, the owners hired prostitutes and thugs and corrupt cops to come and literally bash their skulls. Like a mafia hit on 300 women. I'm talking grab a skull, grab someone else's skull, and smash them together. It was absolutely ludicrous. In some cases, these young women were the sole providers for their families. They were starving at home. The strike was taking a toll on the company and the women. The company was able to have some temps shipped in to run the facility during the strike, but this was very costly. The women, industry-wide, would donate to each other to help sustain their cause. But as all the other factories began to unionize, the money slowly stopped coming in. Miraculously, Anne Morgan, the daughter of J.P. Morgan, a very wealthy man at the time, began to shell money towards the women's cause. This then caused the owners to make a deal for shorter days and more pay, but this wouldn't suffice. The women needed a union to help keep their gains. The owners could easily slip back to old ways and not be held accountable. This, however, caused Anne Morgan to publicly condemn the women and stop support. Her family was made wealthy off the capitalist system that was America. She just wanted them to have better pay and not become socialist union lovers. With the last hope gone, the women took the deal and went back to their cold, dirty area and went back to their work. Albeit with one less hour to work. This would be a fatal deal, however. Saturday, March 25th, after a long 8-hour shift, a woman lit a cigarette before the end of shift bell rung. The match or cigarette would be the cause of the fire. The 8th floor was known for sneaking cigarette breaks, thus the fire began on the 8th floor. At 4:40 p.m. was when the fire first was spotted. The 8th floor quickly evacuated. During the evacuation, the building manager phoned the business on the lower half of the building, but only called the 10th floor to warn them, thinking the 10th floor would tell the 9th floor, since they're the same company. The 10th floor, however, did not do that and escaped to the roof just in time. The 9th floor, however, was not warned and continued to work and wait for the end of shift bell. The fire reached them within 5 minutes at 4:45. Naturally, everyone scrambled for an exit. The stairwell was locked to help with loss prevention. The fire escape was available and the elevator was available. Many smushed onto the elevator, and a couple dozen crowded the outside fire escape. Unfortunately, these were not safe options. The weight of 20 people on the escape and the heat of the fire caused the cheap metal to melt, bend, and twist off of the face of the building. All 20 women fell to their death. That was now no longer an exit. The elevator is slow and the stairwell is still locked. Many tried to kick the door in. This caused great attention and hope, and many women began to flock to this area. The influx of people and the air filling with smoke began to cause a crush, compressed against one another, and gasping in smoke. Many perished this way. Similar to 9/11, the women also congregated at the windows to get fresh air. This is also when the firefighters arrived. Progressive New York had the most up-to-date firefighting gear and tools in the world, but the men weren't trained well, and their modern equipment still wasn't good enough. These ladies were on the 9th floor. The ladder and hoses barely reached the 5th floor. Although it's closer to the fire than the ground, that's still a 50-foot drop to the firefighters, or about 15 meters for those who don't use freedom units. The ladders and hoses were useless to them, so many people became desperate for clean New York City air, that a crush began to form at the windows as well, causing a handful to be pushed to their death. The firemen threw out their nets and tried to catch the women, but the downward force of a body falling from 90 feet or 27.5 meters is too great of a force for even 7 men to catch. The women would yank the nets right out of their grasps, taking patches of skin off their hands with it. The men still picked the net right back up and would try to catch the women, falling immediately after in most cases. The only safe escape was the elevator. Joseph Zito was the operator that day. He was able to make 3 successful trips to the 9th floor. However, with the fire and its heat growing so great, the cheap metal of the elevator and its system grew soft. Women at the front of the pileup at the elevator could see behind them the vast inferno that engulfed the factory and devouring the women and few men at the back of the pileup. Out of desperation, the women opened the elevator shaft doors and attempted to slide down the cart's cables in order to land on top of the cart and get out on a lower floor. A few women jumped to the cable, but the excitement and desperation caused people to be pushed into the shaft. They'd fall a few stories and land on top of the cart. This caused the top of the cart to cave in due to the amount of bodies plummeting onto it. The elevator is now inoperable, and this caused a frenzied race to the second stairwell door. They began to desperately attempt to break down the doors, but no success was had. This was partially unsuccessful due to people at the doors having no room to try to break down the doors, and a strong crush beginning to smother the people at the doors, as women on fire began to push at the people in the front, climb over top, and desperately try to escape. The most eerie part of it all is that out of everything that broke due to being cheap, the doors never budged, even with the heat and the strength of the crush. Death was certain at this point. Many of the women left died of asphyxiation. More were consumed by the fire, and the final few held hands as they jumped from the windows hand in hand or hugged each other as the flames consumed them. Shockingly, this was all over in 30 minutes. Start to extinguish, 30 minutes. The 8th and 9th floors were completely gone. A death toll of 146 people, 123 women, and 23 men. Most of these women weren't even over the age of 25. The youngest victim was just 14 years old. There was a memorial, and over 500,000 people showed up. They all knew these women as the brave strikers that had the daughter of J.P. Morgan behind them. These courageous women dead from what they tried to warn the nation of. An inquiry on the owners was done, and obviously they found that the factory was a literal death trap. However, there weren't any laws pre-progressive era that prevented a big business from running a death trap. The real issue was who locked the stairwell doors, even if the stairwell probably would have collapsed as well due to being cheaply made. No one could prove the owners ordered the doors locked, and they got away. This is around the time the progressive era really began to take off in America. The government began to step in on big business, women gained suffrage, the normalization of an 8-hour work shift, unions, fair pay, safe workspaces, government regulation. New York was first to step up. A statewide investigation done by the New York Investigative Commission found that New York had 200 more factories in the state with similar conditions as the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. For some reason, it was like inventing the wheel when they discovered that employers don't care about their employees, and that employers take advantage. 64 new laws were passed to better protect workers. This became a precedent for the rest of the nation, fortunately. Smoke alarms, sprinkler systems, fire doors that open outward, building inspections, and extinguishers are all mandatory now. New York had many issues, but this lead they took is very admirable at a time when big business ruled the nation. The Asch Building is now the Brown Building. The owners did have to pay $75 to each victim's family. That's about $2,400 today, because they were found guilty of wrongful death, but not manslaughter. 2 years later, one of the owners was fined $20 for, wait for it, locking the doors in his factory. The last living survivor, Rose Friedman, died in Beverly Hills, California in 2001, aged 107. Thank you for giving the video a listen today and for making it this far. Thank you to all the people who have been subscribing. My last video, I just hit 100 subs, and now I'm almost at 200 and I haven't even posted anything in between time. I appreciate y'all's patience with me, and I hope that y'all enjoyed today's video. Let me know some more video ideas. Did you think this tragedy was interesting? Did the video have any kind of interest to you? Please let me know in the comments. And again, thanks for listening. Take care.